One of the best TFT sets of all time is back. Set 10 Remix Rumble Revival is here, and with it, a wave of nostalgia, even though it only came out like a year and a half ago. For some reason, it feels like ages, and my god, I missed a lot of these units and traits. If you're like me and you've forgotten a lot of Set 10 before we started playing, or you're just brand new to Remix Rumble in general, TFT Academy's got you. Let's go ahead and jump into the tier list and find out what are some of the best comps to get started with. Let's go over a couple mechanics that you should know before you dive into your first Set 10 game. The first is that they have new updated bag pool sizes, meaning copies of a champion in the pool. For 1 cost, there are 50. For 2 cost, there are 40. For 3 cost, there are 30. For 4 cost, there are 12. And for 5 cost, there are 10. This is important because that way, if you're playing any 1 cost, 2 cost, or 3 cost reroll, even if you're contested by a couple players, you should still be able to hit. And also, if someone plays a single headliner of your 4 cost, that doesn't mean you can't hit a 2-star 4 cost or even go for a 3-star. There's also going to be new augments and opening counters like usual, as well as the hacks that appear with the mechanic of headliner. Now, I also want to highlight the headliner mechanic itself. There's a couple important rules to note. The first rule worth discussing is that you actually can manipulate the headliner that you see based off the trait that's in your shop. If you see a Katarina, for example, that's country and you really want a crowd diver, if you skip that, the next Katarina you see is guaranteed to be crowd diver. So if you're trying to manipulate around the headliner specific trait that you need, make sure to keep note of that. The second thing is really mainly applying to 4 cost and 5 cost, and that's you can't see a headliner of a specific unit if there are less than half of the copies in the pool. This is because the really optimal way to actually roll for a 3-star was to find 6 copies of it, and then you find the headliner itself for the 3-star 4 cost. And that was actually a big problem for ending games too quickly. So they made some kind of hidden rule where it's not possible. And based on the old bag sizes, you need to find it 5 plus 3 and then find the last one individually. And that's how you got the 3-star 4 cost. But now that they increased bag size to 12, you might end up finding it. The TLDR is just remember that it's not as easy to find 6 plus 3. You might have to go 5 plus 3 plus 1. The gaps in these tiers, S, A, B, and C, are actually not very big. And I think that as long as you really know what you're doing, you can win with anything. I've actually had a lot of success with almost every C tier comp. Personally, I've gotten easy first with them. And they can compete with the S. As long as you kind of have the general core concept of what you need to do, you can pretty much get an advantage over anybody and top 4 with all these comps. Set 10 was quite flexible and really memorable, but there was actually a lot of imbalances. Heartsteel was way too good for a really long time, and Superfan Reroll was a big problem throughout most of the set. But in reality, as long as you play well and solid, you should be able to find success with a lot of things. So there's no real official patch approach, just have fun and really rock out to your favorite tunes. That being said, in my personal opinion, the best comp in the game is Annie Reroll with Spellweavers. There's actually 2 ways you can play Annie. One is you can play a Spellweaver approach. The other is you can play Emo, depending on whether or not you get like an Emo emblem. An Emo emblem is really good on spell caches like Ahri, for example, or put on some other 5 cost. In the early game, Annie is best paired with Superfan or Spellweavers. So if you're able to get Lilia, Kennen, and Nico potentially, you can get another item on Annie very quickly through Superfan in the early game and complete Annie very quickly with best in slot of Blue Buff Nashers and Jewel Gauntlet. You can also go for a Gunblade or just other damage items in general if you can't find a Jewel Gauntlet. In terms of your tank, you put it on just whoever you can prioritize a 2-star first. If you hit Echo 2 first, make him the tank. If you hit Nico 2 first, make her the tank. In the meantime, you can play Lilia 2 and Kennen 2, even as your headliner in the early game while you collect copies of Annie. One tactic that you can have with this 1-cost reroll, and we'll talk about it a lot throughout the video, is that you can just buy like Lilia 2, carry Annie in the beginning with a 2-star, and then eventually find Annie 3 when you sell your headliner ahead of your turn that you want to roll for the Annie 3. So you can play like Lilia 2, Kennen 2 as your item holder for Nico items, and then at the end of stage 2-7, sell your headliner, and then start rolling for Annie 3, and you actually only have to roll a few times before you hit Annie, Emo, or Spellweaver. Once you finish Annie 3, push levels and add in more Spellweavers. You can put in Ahri as a duo carry. We have Shojin here just because it's hard to get a second blue buff. It's difficult to get that many tiers, but a second blue buff is ideal with Gunblade Nashers, and you just kind of play the usual Ahri build. And then your top end is Ziggs or Sona, depending on what you have and what the emblems that you end up hitting. Annie's also really good with no scout, no pivot, because you just play a bunch of these cheap 1-cost and scale it, as well as other really powerful AP things like Piercing Lotus. She's also really good with pumping up, getting her a lot of attack speed so she can cast more often and spam, because the thing about Spellweavers is the more they cast, the more AP they scale. So you end up bursting a lot. Your positioning is going to change every game with KDA, very similar to Street Demon if you're playing set 14 Cyber City right now. So just adjust your positioning accordingly. Just try to keep Annie as safe as possible. The biggest thing about positioning is you should keep in mind that Hyperpop tends to buff the closest units. So you kind of want to have Lulu here. Lulu buffs to Annie and Ahri. Ziggs buffs to Annie. That ends up being a really nice small little way you can get a team buff. And then the other thing too is Echo AoEs and stuns anyone touching around him. So you want to usually trigger his true damage with a random component and then have him AoE some really important units. Spellweaver Ahri is really powerful as well, although I think that she primarily plays in 2 shells right now. You play her in KDA and you duo carry a Kayle, or you play a Sentinel package and you have her solo carry, but you kind of play like an infinite stall package around Blitzcrank and then just play some Spellweavers in the back. Both versions are pretty viable. I think KDA's stats are a little bit better, only because I just think that there's better augments for them in the game. Things like Remember Your Roots are just really good for KDA getting a ton of stats. Little Buddies is pretty insane, this comp, and there's even some other unique augments for set 10 Revival, like Mesmeric Performance, which is very, very good for this comp. And so because there's just like a lot of good augments for KDA, you should just give it a try. And it's also a really easy comp to play, just because the positioning is pretty straightforward, and all you really want is Ahri, is blue buff, Nashers, and Gunblade, and then Hand of Justice, double healing, and Infinity Edge for a Kayle. A Kayle just takes whatever leftover items, don't tunnel on Biss, but you do tend to want to have some damage and some healing on her. You can't just stack triple healing. Also, Kale's not that good with Titan's Resolve. She's a lot better with damage items, as if you're trying to build an assassin like Zed in the current set. Actually, Zed in both in set 10 Revival and set 14. You really want to have like sharp, strong melee items and Edge of Night if you need something defensive. Your super fan is going to be on Ahri or Kayle. Just doesn't really matter as long as you get it on either, and you would prefer to do KD, of course. There's also Rap Queen Kayle, which is like a situational variation of KDA and true damage, and you have to hit the augment Rap Queen. It's kind of interesting because you basically fuse KDA and true damage, and that's going to be one of the defining things about the set Revival. There's a couple of augments that require you to remix, if you will, different traits together that weren't really a thing back in set 10. We did have augments, but we didn't have trait fusion augments the way that we have now. So this is like a hero augment and a trait fusion augment. Very, very interesting idea. Just try to primary carry a Kayle and give her the true carry items, and then give Ahri whatever left over. In this situation, you'd also trio carry Qiyana if you can get Qiyana too. She ends up capping your board. One thing about Qiyana, by the way, we wrote that Qiyana is anti-tank, and that's a little bit of a weird concept if you haven't heard of it. But basically, Qiyana is a strong single target stun onto one unit, and you want her to lock onto the enemy tank, because if you get her true damage bonus or bling bonus, she ends up giving a copy of whatever she casted on to an ally. So if she casts onto an enemy, let's say Alawi or maybe another enemy, Echo or Nico, you can get a Warmog, you can get a Sunfire, you can get another Spark, right? That kind of stuff, Redemption. And you might even kill them and get a component. And you really want Qiyana to line up in front of that tank. And so in this position for Qiyana, she would always 100% lock onto whatever unit is in front of Echo to his right. She will never literally hit this other unit in 50-50. But if Qiyana is here between Echo and Lilia, it's a 50-50. That also is true if you swap Qiyana to Kennen. Qiyana will attack the unit here in front of Lilia and not in front of Echo. So that's a couple of ways that you can manipulate Qiyana's anti-tank positioning. Just have her lock onto the enemy frontliner and stun them repeatedly. Crowd Diver Katarina is the best anti-backline composition in the game. Katarina's ability with the Bouncing Blade has the highest chance of just sniping a backline unit. And also the Crowd Divers themselves jump to the backline upon death and deal AoE. So you end up positioning in a really interesting way where you kind of have Katarina and Zed stacked here, and then you like stack other Crowd Divers on the left side so that when Evelyn dies, she jumps to the top right, so then Katarina can stun them and potentially kill them. This is a 2-cost reroll comp, so you roll out 6, and you want to look for Crowd Diver Katarina, which I believe gives you Hand of Justice, so you should be able to go for JG and Hand of Justice. And you really, really want Crowd Diver Katarina because 6 Crowd Diver is just so much damage amp, especially in the late stage of the game. And you don't really get that without the Katarina headliner, and you're going to be stuck with Country, which you don't really want to play. Also, getting a lot of Omnivamp is really good. Sated Spellweaver, Vampirism, Health as well. That's all really good. And of course, there are a couple of Crowd Diver specific augments. I personally haven't picked this one, but it looks fine. Give me energy. Maybe you can just position a little bit like a stack and just let Katarina assassinate stuff. Zed's going to be your duo carry. You're going to take over leftover items, and you're going to duo carry Cat and Zed. If you do get extra items beyond that, just put it on Kiana and have Kiana anti-tank. In the early game, just carry Evelynn with these items if you can't get Katarina, and just play around KDA and maybe a Crowd Diver Eve. And finally, Heartsteel, my beloved. This is my favorite comp to ever exist. I have played Heartsteel in probably like 75% of my set 10 games so far. Every time I play it, even if I don't end on Heartsteel, I just play in the mid game just to get some resources. It's just really fun because the units themselves are fun. You have Ezreal blinking all over the place. I actually really like how Aphelios feels, but also you can get a bunch of rewards and cash out higher and higher, especially if you're playing things like Heartthrobs and going for big amount of cash outs. The important thing to remember about Heartsteel is that if you raise the stakes, that's the equivalent of saving intel in set 14, but you cannot win. If you win, you immediately cash out and you take a penalty on your hearts, getting a lower cash out. So make sure that if you raise the stakes, you lose 4 more. Otherwise, just take the cash out and play for another 4-turn interval. There are so many Heartsteel variations that I could just spend basically the rest of this video talking about, like how you can play Ezreal Flex with Zed. You could play Ezreal with Poppy, as we have listed here. You could play Ezreal Caitlyn duo. You can play Ezreal and Akali with Executioner True Damage. There are just so many different variations they can play with Heartsteel that we can't really list them all. You often don't play 5 Heartsteel in the late game. You always just reduce down to 3. And you're always trying to play blue buff, i.e. red buff Ezreal in some variation because he's really good with casting a lot and his damage is amplified significantly with Big Shot. So you want him spam casting as much as you can. One thing that's misunderstood about Heartsteel is that you're not trying to just lose every fight with it in the beginning of the game. You actually want to win streak early so that you have the HP later on to lose matches for Heartsteel stacks. So it's actually a good thing to play strongest board and slam 80 items and win, right? So if you find things like early Corki 2, just go ahead and play that plus upgrade Sentinel and then collect Heartsteel units for later on. This is the big advantage that people like Malala had back in set 10. Malala was very, very good at Heartsteel and understood all different kind of flex dynamic boards, and that's why he did so well all set long. The other thing, too, is don't feel super tied to your 4 costs. So if you hit Poppy 2 as your headliner or you hit Ezreal 2 as your headliner, the way you truly cap is actually to go for a 5-cost headliner. So you can play like Lucian headliner, you can play Yorick, you could play Alawi, you could play Kiana as well. If you play Kiana, Tech and Echo, and then Echo can play into Sentinel through like Cassante, for example, or you can just kind of play a different package entirely with Yone and Crowd Diver. So you have like so many different things you can do. I'm just going to be sitting here yapping because pretty much I'm starting to just basically list like 20 different champions for you to think about. But Heartsteel 80 Flex is the nuts. It's like the #1 reason why I love this set. Super fun and flexible. Uses all kinds of itemization. Just make sure tech in Jazz plus Heartsteel and just miss and match any kind of 5-cost you want. Good stuff, man. Good stuff. At the top of A tier, we have Punk Reroll, which is actually super popular. I think it's one of the most popular comps in set 10 because it's just fun to reroll. Punk's mechanic says that you get a 1 gold reroll once per turn. And so if you use your Punk roll, you get a little bit of the stat boost, you get permanent AD, and you also get another shop to look at. So you're naturally going to hit things like Jinx 3, Vi 3, Twitch 3, Pantheon 3, and you get to push levels. It's really good with the Punk emblem. If you get the 6 Punk, it actually can win the game if you can find a way to get Punk onto a Yorick and then find a way to get Vertical Guardians. 6 Punk, 6 Guardian is actually like Exodia, but that's like really hard to get. You have to get to 10 and you have to get the emblem. This Amumu ends up just being a temporary holder because you can tie in Vex to the Executioner this way. Really good with no scout, no pivot. Really good with, you know, specific augments that make Punk really strong. And very, very good with anything that scales well with attack speed. So pumping up and overheal for Jinx is quite dang good. The reason why it's in A and not S is because Punk can only do so well, and it's going to get outscaled by the 4 and 5 cost comps in the late game, but it just dominates early so consistently because you're rolling really cheap and effectively, and you're able to snowball leads. I wouldn't play Punk, though, unless I have any kind of bow or sword components for Jinx. I think if you're starting like Tier, Rod, and Belts, that's going to be really hard sell on Jinx. I guess you could open in that situation for a Rage Blade, but again, you want to be win streaking early. And trying to press your advantage. The theory behind Punk of why it's good is that if you spend that 1 gold to roll, but you win, winning gives you a gold. So it's almost like it didn't cost you any gold to necessarily roll, and you're able to leverage that into a win streak and upgrade your board. Pretty straightforward composition, and I would say that if you're looking for a reroll comp to try for the first time of the set and you don't know what to do, try Punk Reroll. If you want to play a vertical, play KDA and have a lot of fun. Executioners was really good at its peak in set 10, and it's still pretty solid, but it's a very expensive comp, and it kind of has a weird window because it takes a while to get Vex 3 and a Mumu 3, and then ideally you also even chase like a duo carry, either Twitch 3 or Samira 3, and that's really expensive. But by the time you can get all these things online, sometimes you end up hitting things like the Fast 9 5-cost boards or like Heartsteel, and it's going to be really hard to keep up with them. So your window is actually really tiny. As such, the only time you really play this is if you're like super far ahead economically and you're able to get like, you know, the 3-star Vex and Mumu very fast and find a way to get access to all these 4 costs. Because if you just look at this comp, it's just so expensive. So finding a way to get to this board is really hard, but it's very, very good if you're able to get items on a Mumu 3, Vex 3, and a dual carry Executioner. It's also really good with Emo. So if you find Emo Vex or Emo Mumu, and you get an Emo emblem, Emo on like Karthus, for example, is really strong. And I would transition to playing Vex Karthus duo carry and just kind of have Twitch and Samira support. The other thing about Vex is that she wants to be in the bottom center because she's going to hit in the 1 hex pocket. And so if you have her here, she's only going to hit maybe like this unit pocket, and you're going to lose this sort of DPS on the side. The other variation that plays around Executioners is Country Executioners, aka Samira, Urgot, and Vex. Very powerful, but also, again, very expensive. One augment that I think I would really take is Bounty Hunters, which is just basically like an econ augment to help you get things rolling. But Country is really fun. It's like a summon trait. You star up your country. You make a stronger country. You could justify going for Tom Kench 3 as well if you can afford everything. And just generally like just overpower people through sheer value. Samira's best in slot is Infinity Edge, Last Whisper, and Giant Slayer. But you can also play Guard Breaker. You can also play Deathblade. Just anything that just gets her dealing the damage is really good. Urgot just takes any fighter items remaining. I think Urgot's actually really good with anti-heal. So Morello and Red Buff is also pretty solid on him because he hits in just like a little cone. So he's able to tag everything. But yeah, just pretty much just slap whatever offensive AD items on Samira, any tank items on Set or Mumu or Thresh, any fighter items on Urgot, and any AP items on Vex. And sometimes in rare cases, you can itemize all of them and you will crush. If you have Trifecta, you can drop Set and a Mumu and play Poppy and Yorick there. So that way you can get the Guardian Mosher that way. And one thing that's interesting to know is that the Dreadsteed horse, the Hecarim, is always going to come from the same side every single fight. So that might be useful both in terms of how you position as well as how you counterplay. Just keep in mind that Hecarim's going to come in from the same side every single time. Karthus Akali Pentakill. This was the big terror at the beginning of the set. Karthus Akali deleted everything because Kali would dash to the back line. She throws a shuriken, zip, 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 tags everything, does a big amount of damage in AoE to the back line. Then Karthus just casts on the lowest HP enemies, aka the back line. So Karthus and Akali would just literally duo carry and kill everything. And then if they survived, Viego would jump in and then just AoE and clean everything up. Viego's a physical damage dealer in this, which is actually quite unusual. Viego is kind of known as a AP champion. Like, it's actually very similar to the set 14 version of Viego, where he just jumps in, does a big AoE. But Viego really cares about the physical damage. Look at the second sentence. Viego's attacks on marked enemies deal physical damage. That actually is really important. So Viego really wants strong AD items. So usually it goes 80 on Akali, 80 on Viego, AP on Karthus. Karthus actually really likes double mana in the stats. I think it's just to help him cast more often because the more he casts, the better. So you can tag him with this and then add AP like Jewel Gauntlet is fine. Deathcap might actually be better than Jewel Gauntlet, so we might have to make a little update there. But just generally speaking, 2 mana items plus AP is really good on Karthus. Then just give Mordekaiser whatever is left over. And Mordekaiser is really good with Crown Shield as well as just generic health and resistances. Another variation you can play of Pentakill, by the way, if you don't even want to play around Akali, is you can go for 3-star Mordekaiser and Viego and Karthus. That's not actually a variation that we have listed, but that's just something that exists. Mordekaiser 3 with 7 Pentakill is very, very good. So just keep that in mind if you have an opportunity to go for it. We'll probably put this as another variation on our tier list later this week. Positioning for Akali does matter. You want her on the opposite side of whoever your enemy carry target is. So let's say Annie's in the top right. You want to position Akali here in the top left so she can mark it. And that's important for Viego and cards at the lineup as well. The Pentakill trait itself is a little bit confusing. Every time there's a kill, a random champion ends up getting damage amp. So that part you can't control. But it's important to note that there's kind of like an ascension aspect of the trait. On the 5th kill, all Pentakill champions will rock out, and the team gets 50% attack speed. So that is partially an important thing to know, just in case people didn't know, because I think some people don't really understand how the Pentakill trait works. There's like the first half of the phase that scales up, and then there's the ascension part. EDM is also really good, and there's 2 versions of EDM that stand out in particular. The first is that you reroll around Jax, and you get Jax with a bunch of bursts like Jewel Gauntlet, Hand of Justice, and either something defensive or just like a Bloodthirster / second Hand of Justice. When you sample Jax, it's kind of like Kingpin Syndicate from this set 14. You basically select Jax's ability, and then all EDM units copy that ability. So when you sample Jax, he like jumps to the highest held enemy, does like an AoE, and then jumps back. And that ends up being really strong because Zed, Zac, and Lux all jump in and deal a bunch of damage and then hop back out. Usually when you reroll Jax, you're also rerolling Lux because it's just easier to hit as a duo carry as opposed to Zed. And you want to give Lux leftover AP because one thing that's really important about EDM in particular is that whoever you sample, that effectiveness scales off of the base champion's AP. What that means is the AP damage done by Lux when she samples Jax is based on her holding things like Deathcap and Archangels, which means that Zed is actually not going to deal as much damage because he is going to be holding AD items and Zac is going to be holding tank items. He's not going to actually be dealing as much AP. But that also applies to everything else. If you ever play an EDM variation that samples Zed, it's going to take all the base stats of everybody else for the same reason, and that also doubles for Lux. This is a composition that actually wants to roll on 7, by the way, because you want to access the 4 cost. So usually what you do is you would like lose streak early, collect Jax items, then roll for Jax 2, stabilize win stage 3 around Jax 2 and some Moshers with EDM, then get to 7, roll for Jax 3, Lux 3, Zed, Zac, and then ideally top 2, top 3 from there. The other variation of EDM that's really powerful is Lux primary, and Lux is particularly insane with Sniper's Focus. The data on it is outrageous. I haven't tried it myself, but it just looks really, really good. Lux is super powerful, and you can sample Lux and just do a ton of laser beams. There's actually a kind of a meme build that you can do where you can also trap your units in the corner. You can put Lux up 1, Ziggs, and then put Jax 3 in the corner. So that way Jax is forced to do a laser beam with Lux as well. So that way Jax doesn't die. I don't know if that's very good, but give it a try and let me know how it goes. You can even use the tentacles to trap some of your units if you want, if you are so inclined to do so. The rest of the composition after the 4 EDM is just make sure you get 2 Dazzler in plus some frontline. So in this case, we have like Set and Alawi. Disco's an easy transition into it because Alami's a Dazzler, Lux can fit into it, and you can transition over while having Zac as a bruiser. Makes very simple sense. And there's even hybridizations of way you can play Jax and Lux interchangeably. There's going to be some matchups where you want to sample Jax, and then other matchups where Jax diving in could be problematic because he gets focused too hard. So instead, you might have Jax go into Lux mode and laser it down. An example could be like Annie Spellweaver. Jax diving in, Annie might lock on the Jax and Jax dies too quickly and you're not able to get effectivenesses. But then if you have Lux being sampled, it's a possibility that Jax and Lux on the other side ends up zapping the Annie and just deleting in the back line. And the crazy thing about it is that you actually have the EDM sample possibility that you can choose whichever one you want. The crazy thing is you can wait to see what matchup you are to choose who to sample before the fight starts. So you hold the sample and then you see who you queue up in, and then you choose Jax or Lux at the very last second. It's very, very OP if you're able to know what you're doing and can win you many, many clutch fights. It is pretty cringe. I think some people might call you out in chat, be like, oh, that's pretty lame, but that is the optimized way to play it, and this is the best version of that EDM comp where you're able to select Jax and Lux. Oh, and then one other thing too is you cap this board with Jazz because you have actually a surprising amount of traits that you active. A lot of 2-ofs in this set. That's partially what makes set 10 so satisfying. There's so many 2 traits that you just activate basically for free, and you can splash and mix and match a bunch of traits for Jazz. In the B tier, a lot of these compositions can actually very much keep up with the top, but you just need to have the right conditions set up, and you have to high roll a little bit more in order to get there, but they're still very solid if you get the setup for it. Pentakill Kayle is particularly really gated around rods. Double Rage Blade and Gunblade is very important, so for that reason, it's kind of hard to get there, but she is very good with a bunch of these attack speed augments like pumping up, Clockwork Accelerator. Really good with anger issues, just like having a bunch of Rage Blades. This helps her scale. It's just a really fun version of having Pentakill go off with all that Rage Blade attack speed. So don't really play this unless you're able to find a bunch of bows and rods early. The stronger version of this is, by the way, is Pentakill, and I don't think you want to play the Edgelord version at all because Edgelord gives you a bunch of attack speed and it's too fragile. You want to play like a more meaty front line. And if you can, try to go for Mordekaiser 3 here. 2 damage Senna is actually really good, but she falls off late game. It's a very safe top 4 comp, and it's something that's sort of dependent on you hitting a true damage emblem to really unlock its true power, if you will. True damage emblem is insane on a wide mixture of units. The easiest unit to put it on is Caitlyn, just because she's a rapid fire that ties in with Senna herself. You want to position Senna in the bottom center because she ends up hitting a pocket of AoE. She shoots and then she hits like an AoE and it explodes bigger and bigger. So you really want her to be centered, otherwise you're going to be missing out on a lot of damage. And it's a comp that caps out with like Itemized Akali and Kiana printing a lot. So make sure Kiana is positioned the anti-tank. We just talked about it before, but if you see a tank is over here, Kiana wants to be lined up back here because if she's here, it's 50-50 to the left and right. And that also applies. Sometimes you want to put Kiana here and sometimes you want to put Kiana here as well. Bard MF Reroll struggles a lot. I think that this comp is pretty much just an augment check for That's Jazz Baby, which would probably make it situational. But I've seen people also do some other stuff like, no scout, no pivot, and just scale that way. The most important thing about this is that you want to scale Bard's number of cast. Every, I believe, 8 cast, he shoots 1 more Doot, which is really powerful once you get him ramping. So you want to get blue buff and adaptive, so that way he can just keep casting as much as he can. And then by the end of the game, he's going to be spamming so many Doots that he's going to be hard to deal with. And then you just activate a bunch of super fan and regular traits with him like usual. Very, very good if you can get it going early with That's Jazz Baby. But I think that in general, I wouldn't be looking to play this comp without it. Yone and Riven are basically 2 peas in a pod. It's 3-cost melee reroll, and they both tend to play from loose streak, which is just very risky. And they both kind of have interchangeability because they're both edgelords. So let's briefly talk a little bit about it. Yone really wants Infinity Edge, Hodge, and Titan's Resolve. If you can't get Infinity Edge, you can go for a second Titans as well. I think he's really good with the Augment Gargantuan Resolve, assuming it's in the set. It says it in our data mined database that it is in there, but if it's not, then don't worry about it. He's also really good with Cooking Pot because you can make Crowd Diver Emblem and start stacking the Yone and things like that. And yes, you can play Heartsteel. He's really good with a mixture of 4 Crowd Diver, Yone 3, Mord, and Zed. And Yone does want to be on the side because he is going to assassinate the backline as soon as he kills his tank. Position Yone on the weak side of a bunch of tanks. Edgelords can be a really tricky trait to understand with their movement, but basically, once they get their opponents to half-life, they flip behind them. And this is going to be the way that you get access to the back line. Imagine if the enemy tank is here. Yone is going to be attacking this tank. After he gets this down to 50%, he's actually going to flip behind this tank, finish killing it, and then transition to find whoever's nearby. And if there's nobody nearby, then he ends up just going straight to the back line. That's basically a summary of saying just put Yone on the side, and the nuance between Yone is sometimes you want to put him here and sometimes you want to put him here because then he can flip this way as well into the enemy team. So there's like a couple of like small different nuances, and that also mirrors on the other side as well. But if you just don't want to care and remember, just put Yone here on B1 or B7. That's totally fine. Riven is the 8-bit version of this, and honestly caps way higher because I like Caitlyn as a backline as opposed to trying to play too many melee carries. And it has a really good ceiling with 8-bit emblem on the Yone as well. You can duo carry this. But it is way more expensive and hard to get off. So I would only really want to play this if I can play around something like Intercoin, or there's another augment that lets you fit in the Heartsteel with the 8-bit. I believe it is Retro Gamers. And if you're able to get a lot of econ like Heroic Grab Bag, Patience of Virtue, these were augments that we took back then and are still very good because hitting the 3-star Riven is really important. A lot of times you're going to want a loose streak to get the econ to do this. So yeah, it's just going to be really hard to pull it off. But the ceiling of the composition is really high. So a lot of people really like playing it if they're in loose streak positions and they have strong melee items. Finally, Disco. This is a comp that I think a lot of people want to be good, but the reality is it's a fast 9 comp, and fast 9 comps are just super hit or miss. You basically have to be very far ahead economically and hit Twisted Fate, and then get to 9 and look for like Alawi, Sona, Ziggs, and have items for all of them. It's just very expensive of a comp. But the ceiling of the comp can be really high if you can get there because you're playing around so many 5 costs. It's also got the best music track in the game, in my opinion. Disco just slaps super hard, so even if you go bot 4, you're still probably going to have a good time playing this comp. I think one thing misunderstood about Twisted Fate is that he does scale off of attack speed, he throws more cards, but you actually just want more AP on him, and that's because Disco ends up giving attack speed anyways, and so Twisted Fate will naturally scale, and so you can get red buffs, you give him more of that attack speed and AP, and then just give him a bunch of damage. You can also give him Shojin, Adaptive, and other things like that too. I think Rage Blade's kind of bait on Twisted Fate personally. I'd rather have Rage Blade on Sona and have her scale off the attack speed, because when she's able to get a bunch of the attack speed scaling, ends up being really, really powerful. I think Sona actually wants AP or attack speed. Healing was really nerfed a lot during the live set, but it's possible that the numbers are different. So experiment and find out what is actually best on your own. And then the other thing too is I think Blooding Jewel is insane with Dazzlers. Dazzlers in particular deal damage over time, and Blooding Jewel reduces that. So I think Blooding Jewel on Twisted Fate is also theoretically a very powerful combo, although I haven't seen it before. In the C tier are a bunch of 1-cost rerolls that just falls off. Corki is like if you just hit a bunch of Corki, you're playing around 8-bit, and then once you hit Corki, you just find Caitlyn and you push for 5 costs. It just makes pretty much basic sense. Yasuo is just kind of like Shaco from this current set in set 14 Cyber City, scaling permanent AD for each kill, but falls off late game unless you hit some really high top end like Kiana 2. And then Olaf is super fun. I really love him with Too Big to Fail. This is like my favorite augment with him. You build him with Double Titans and Sterak's Gauge, but he falls off, and you really have to do okay with Karthus or some kind of 5 cost in order to really make it work. So just kind of struggles a lot in terms of the mid and late game. I do want to give 2 final shoutouts to situational comps I think are really good. The first is Submit to the Pit Moshers. It's very, very good, and you can carry pretty much anybody here. You can carry Poppy as a primary. It's like a pretty straightforward gameplay. Just play like a standard fast 8, and you put these items on Gnar. You can reroll Gnar. You can reroll Urgot. You can reroll Gnar and Urgot. You can play for Yorick. You can even go for set 3. There's just like a lot of different things you can do. You can even probably find ways to play Jax as well and squeeze in some EDM if you need. So very, very versatile. It's also like really good with like Lucky Gloves, really good with investment strategy to be able to get everything going. So very, very nice composition that just plays around 8 Moshers. And last but not least, perhaps my favorite meme build from set 10, which is Archangel's Garen. Garen scales his max HP gain with AP, but the thing is, there's more artifacts that didn't exist back in set 10, like Innervating Locket and Talisman Ascension. These are artifacts that didn't exist back then. Anima Visage did, but you know, you don't get all these artifacts back then, so you get to play with some really fun new toys and meme super hard. You basically play Sentinel Ahri, and you have this Garen go really large. I believe I have a YouTube video of it. Super funny build, and Garen just gets super crazy, like 20k HP, just becomes unkillable. So that's my set 10 tier list in a nutshell. Remember, most important thing, just have fun and just kick back and relax to some good tunes, because set 10 was one of my favorite sets. This was a really special set, and especially with some of the problems in recent sets that's been magnified lately, I really appreciate a lot of what set 10 had in terms of the fun and the flavor. The production value of the set is insane, and I really hope that Riot does another music set in the future. If there's any major updates to set 10 in general throughout the rest of the time that it's here, I might do a second video, but this is just to help you get started, and then we'll update everything else on the tier list if anything major happens. But they usually don't tweak too much of the set revival. They might do some like taps if anything is over the line, like maybe they'll nerf Annie a little bit, and we'll just adjust on the tier list. But you don't really need to know too much more, because there's not going to be like a ton of new comps popping up. Most of what we know is already on this tier list. There might be a couple things we need to add here and there, like variations of like different reroll comps. So enjoy the rest of set 10 revival, have a good time, and rock on.